So, welcome to the part number 2 of my lecture about ownership. The last lecture I told you about the ideas between natural rights and legal positivism, claiming that the ideas behind the discussion of separation of ownership and control is based on a very simple idea that property, the good property, is when you are working with things. A bad way of property is when you own things, and that is the property of the corporation when you have managers that are operating in the corporation, in doing all the things in the firm, and then you have shareholders that are absent from the very operations of the corporation. And that has created the debate about ownership and control. I'm now trying to share the slides here. So now we go to the second part, and that is the owners, shareholders, and principals. I will talk about what is constituting owners of the corporation. I will start with a citation I really like, and that is from Yrjö Collin. He was a professor of University of Chicago, which means that he belongs to those really liberal economists. He got the prize in economic sciences in memory of Alfred Nobel, that is being created by Sveriges Riksbank 2013, so it's quite influential. And he wrote in an article to 1980, he claimed that ownership of the firm is an irrelevant concept. Could you imagine thinking that ownership is not relevant when you're talking about the firm? And I will try to convince you. So after this part of the lecture, you will be able to understand that yes, ownership of the firm is an irrelevant concept. However, we have certain ideas that can explain why ownership should be relevant. Because if Farmer were right, this would be the shortest lecture you have ever attended, because if ownership is not relevant, there is no idea to continue in lecturing about ownership. There is, but let's start with ownership of the firm is an irrelevant concept. I have here my image of his claim of this article from 1980. This is Farmers Corporation, where there are no owners. If you look at on the image, they claim that firm is a contractual nest. It is just a nest of contracts. And these contracts, that is the small lines I have here. All these small lines constitute the contracted factors of production, because you need factors of production in order to create something. So we can start with production equipment. You need some equipment in order to produce. You need labor. You need someone that is working with this equipment. You need input material. That is something that the firm is buying and it's consumed in the production. When you are producing something like furniture, you need wood, for example. So that is the factors of production. But then you need also someone that put up capital. But there are two different forms of capital. First, you need credit capital. Credit capital you need because when you are buying in the firm, you are buying input material, wood, for example. Then you have to pay those that are producing the wood, but you don't get any income because you haven't created the furniture that you will then sell. And when you have sold the furniture, you will get money back. So there is a difference in time when you need to put out money before you can get money. This difference in time, that is credit. You need to lend money in order to pay for the wood before you get the money from the consumers that are buying your furniture. So that is, someone has to come up with credit capital. Then you need also residual capital. Residual capital is the difference between what you get and what you paid out. residual, you could call it profit, because sometimes you get more money from the customers than you need in order to pay all your debts. The difference is a positive, it's a profit, it's a residual, and that's very nice. Most people think that the capitalistic firm is run because it can create this positive residual. But you can also run into problems that you have to pay more for the wood than you get from the final product. So then you are have losses, and that's also residual. The residual is always what's left. So then you get a deficit. Someone has to put in this money in order to pay for the wood, and that is residual capital, those that are paying for the losses. So someone has to assume this factor, paying for the losses, and if there are profit, they get the profit. And in the very center, there is the entrepreneur. According to those people that knows French, entrepreneur means entre, between. It's the one that is in between everything. That's the one that are organizing all these contracts, factors of production. So someone has to make all these contracts with production equipment, input material, to negotiate about credit and about the residual capital. And so this constitutes the firm in the pharma view. And if you look, there is no owner, there is no capitalist. It's just owners that have ownership of factors of production. There is no owner. Because when you think about owner, today maybe you think, for example, I am the owner of SSAB, a steel corporation. I claim to be an owner. I'm a shareholder. That means that I have the right to the profit. If there is any profit, I will get part of the profit because I have shares. So I assume the factor of production that is residual capital. But in order to get these shares, I had to pay for them. So I had to put in capital beforehand. As I told you in the first lecture, in the first part of the lecture, the corporation in the 1800 went from signed shares to paid shares. You just don't sign that, okay, I will pay losses if there are losses. You have to pay the money in advance. But that is the credit capital. When I give my money to the corporation, and you can use it now, and if there are losses, then you can use this money for the losses. So as a shareholder, I'm residual capital, I'm credit capital, and then I have a little bit entrepreneur also, because I can attend the annual meeting and I can make my vote for a certain kind of strategy for this corporation. And strategy means that you are deciding what kind of contract you should have. So a shareholder, like me, is partly entrepreneur, partly credit capital, partly residual capital. So when you think about an owner, it's the collection of entrepreneur, credit capital, and residual capital. And then if you think about Ingvar Kamprad, a very active owner that were acting in the corporation, working in the corporation, walking around and trying to fix the marketing of IKEA, he also performed labor. He worked in the corporation. So Ingvar Kamprad, when you think about this real old capitalist, then it's an entrepreneur, it's a labor, it's credit capital, residual capital. So the bright idea with pharma's this contractual nest is try to think about factors of production and look at the different owners or individuals. What kind of factors are they collecting, and how would you create an efficient corporation? Is there an efficient corporation when you have certain individuals are just specialized in being residual capital? They don't lend money, they just are residual capital. Or is it more efficient corporation if you have individuals that collect entrepreneur, credit capital, or residual capital? So this model can help you in understanding a corporation and how the different factors are distributed among individuals. But as you can see, there is no owner. However, it's not really the case. This is not a good description of the corporation. If we look at that, there are individuals that assume only residual capital. That is not true. There are no ones that are only residual capital. So we have an alternative, and that's the more normal way of thinking about owners and that of the firm. That's Alka & Demset's corporation. He claimed that there are owners, that exist certain things that is called owners. And a capitalist firm, Alka & Demset says, it's a joint team production. It's not an individual, but it's a production that is created through joint team activities. And you have several input owners that contribute. And there is one party that is very specific and very important in the capitalist firm. And that is the party that is called the owner. And the owner has a certain set of rights. The owner has the right to be the central party common to all contracts with input. So that is the entrepreneur in the pharma image. The owner has the right to observe input behavior, because since we assume that people are egoistic, people would like to not to do their part. If I can get the same salary without working hard, since we assume people are lazy, then people try to avoid working. So you have to be able to observe input behavior and to change people if they are not doing the correct input. The third is to alter the contract. You have the right to alter all these contracts in the contractual nest. That is who will be the member of the team. And then the fourth is that you have the right to the residual. And the right to the residual means that if there are losses, you pay. If there are profit, you gain. And then fifth, you have the right to transfer all these four rights. So that is, if you think about it, what you think when you think about a shareholder, that's quite similar to the shareholder. That is the owner in Alka & Demset's view. But then, of course, you can criticize it and say, well, don't all these are rights. Don't owners have any liabilities? And today we think that owners have liabilities, or at least their corporation has liabilities. Corporate social responsibility, for example, is a collection of liabilities that a corporation has. So if we then, with this idea of owner, with the contractual nest, the pharma, and the Alka & Demset, the specific owner, look at the joint stock company, the corporation. We can see it's like a private firm. That is really the resembling of the Adam Smith idea of a good corporation. That is when you have a single owner, controls the firm, they have the right to profit and losses, the residual, they have the right to change the management, they have the right to sell the firm, and they typically are acting in the corporation. That is a private firm. But the joint stock company is not a private firm. It is a joint stock company. It consists of many suppliers of capital. So a joint stock company is when you have several stockholders, they own shares in a corporation that controls the firm. So in this idea, you have to think that you have stockholders, and then they have an ownership, not in the firm as in the private firm, but they have a ownership in a corporation, and the corporation is the one that owns the firm. For example, me being I have a private firm. That firm owns certain assets, and I can use them. But I am also a shareholder in this steel corporation. If I would like to travel, I cannot go to SSAB. SSAB owns cars. I cannot go to this corporation and say, I need a car, so I take this car and I go and shop. Oh no, you cannot use it. And then I say, well, I'm the owner of the corporation, for heaven's sake, this is my property. And then they say, no, it's not your property. Your property is the property of the joint stock company, not of the firm. The property of the joint stock company is that you have the right to the profit and losses, and you have the right to change the management, you have the right to sell the shares, but you do not have the right to use the property of the firm. So that is really a big divide that you have to think and realize, that the corporation is not the operation, it's not the firm. You have the firm, it's owned by the corporation, and the corporation is owned by the shareholder. So when we look then at the legal structure of a joint stock company, we see at the top you have the shareholders. And as I said, those are the ones that have the certain rights. The shareholders meet at the annual meeting where they decide about the board of directors. They can decide about strategy in broad terms. The annual meeting decides who would be on the board of directors, and the board of directors is maybe most important operational organ of a corporation. And you can see maybe that the board of directors is in between the shareholders and the firm, because the firm, that's when you go to the chief executive officer, the CEO, or the top management team. Those are the ones that are operating in the firm. Those are the ones that are acting and working in the firm. So, as I said, try to think about the corporation. The corporation constitutes maybe mostly of shareholders, annual meeting, board of directors. Board of directors is in between the corporation and the firm in which the CEO and the top management team are acting. In the next slide, I try to define who exercise these rights of the owner. To the left, we have the rights that were defined by Alkan and Demset, and then to the right, we have these different actors in the joint stock company. And as of course, these rights are differently distributed in corporations, but in a normal listed huge corporation, we say that to be the central party common to all contracts with input. Who is the central party? Well, it is really the CEO, because the CEO can decide who could be employed and who could not be employed. And maybe also a little bit the board of directors are influencing or could be considered to be the central party. Who has the right to observe input behavior? Well, the board of directors has the right to inspect the CEO. The CEO has the right to inspect the top management team, and the top management team has the right to inspect all the other input factors. As you can see, shareholders and annual meetings, they are not really having these rights to be the central party to observe input behavior. That's really not a good description of their rights. Then we come to alter the contracts. Then you can say that the annual meeting can alter the contracts, because the annual meeting can decide who should be on the board of directors, and that is to alter a contract, who would be the directors. But then also the board of directors, the CEO and top management team have these rights. And then finally, to be the residual claim, that is the shareholder. That is the main responsibility and the main rights of the shareholder. And then to sell these rights, it belongs also to the shareholder, because the other ones cannot sell these rights. A director cannot sell the directorship to anyone. If you are a CEO, you cannot say, oh, I would like to sell my CEO position to someone. You cannot. So when you look at this table, you can say that, oh, if the owner is constituted by these 5 rights, we see that the owner is distributed among shareholder, annual meeting, board of directors, CEO, and top management team. So the question is still the question of pharma. Who is really the owner? Well, maybe there is no the owner. There are distribution of ownership rights among different actors in the corporation. And then we come to the final slide of this part of the lecture. Delegation, it should say, or specialization. In the classic economic theory, they believe this Alkan and Demset thing, that there is a certain set of rights, which I have defined. All these rights in origin belongs to the shareholder. All these rights are in the hands of the shareholder. And then due to deficiency concerns, these rights are delegated, because it's not really good if I, as a shareholder, try to run a steel production. I cannot do it. So it's better to employ someone that can run the corporation in an efficient manner. So then I delegate my certain parts of my rights to this CEO. Thereby I create efficiency gains. It's a more efficient organization if I delegate some of my rights. than keeping them for myself. On the other hand, I create agency cost because the managers, as Adam Smith said, they are not interested in the profit of the corporation. They are interested in making money on themselves. And then you get this conflict between shareholders and managers. That is the classic economic theory. Most of the literature that you will read in this in corporate governance, I would say 98% of the literature is in this classic economic theory field. Then you have an alternative. I don't know if we have any literature on the course, but the alternative is to have the critical theory that is mainly Marxist in the grounding. It says that capitalism is an economic system, and there are capitalistic functions, and these functions are distributed in the corporation due to specialization. There is a division of labor within the capitalistic function. There is no delegation. The owner do not have the rights and then it's delegated. There are rights that are distributed according to the capitalistic economic functioning. So there is a coherent capital, and within this capital there is a specialization of functions that create profit, and it creates exploitation. Exploitation, according to Marxism, is when people don't get salary for what they are producing. There is a difference. You cannot pay to the labor what they are producing, because then there would be any profit. So that is the exploitation. And then you get minor conflicts within the capitalistic class. The capitalistic class is the one that are organizing the capital. So of course you have some conflicts. And that is what the classic economic theory claimed to be the main conflict in society, in the corporation, between owners and managers. But in the critical Marxist theory, they say, well, there is conflict, but they are not so important. The most important conflict is between capital that extract value from the labor. So the good thing with critical Marxist theory is that it's really offering an alternative way to look at the corporation. The corporation constitutes by specialization of capitalistic functions. It's not a delegation of rights. Now, is this myth or reality? Well, of course, when it concerns idea, it's really hard to say that one is describing reality as such. There are two different perspectives that could be productive in different when you have different questions to ask about reality. So try to look at them as perspectives that can be good or bad using when you analyze a corporation. So that was the end of this second part.